In the small town of Brindlewood, nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, everyone knew each other. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved as they passed, and children played on the sidewalks without worry. The town had its own pulse, a rhythm everyone moved to, and at its heart was an old Victorian house that had stood for generations. On its creaky porch sat Max, a golden retriever with an air of quiet dignity and deep loyalty that no one could understand. Max's life had always been simple. He had once belonged to the Turner family, a cheerful group who had moved into the Victorian home when Max was just a pup. They were the picture of happiness. Mr. Turner, with his broad smile and warm laugh. Mrs. Turner, gentle and kind, who had a way with animals, and their two children, Ben and Emma, who adored Max. Max had been their shadow, bounding through Brindlewood's streets with the children, his tail wagging and his eyes sparkling with joy. In the evenings, he would curl up on the porch steps, watching over the house with a quiet, vigilant presence. But then, in the span of a single day, everything changed. It was sudden, almost like a dream. The Turners packed up their belongings with a haste that left the neighbors whispering. No one understood why they were leaving. They hadn't said a word to anyone. The moving truck arrived early in the morning, and by dusk, they were gone, leaving the house dark and empty. But most heartbreaking of all, they had left Max behind. No one knew why, and no one saw it coming. It was as if the family had been swept away by some invisible force, leaving Max abandoned and confused. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the rooftops, there was Max, sitting on the porch as if nothing had changed. His eyes were fixed on the driveway, his ears perked, waiting. The neighbors noticed him, their hearts aching at the sight. Surely the Turners would be back soon. Perhaps it had been a mistake. Someone would come for him, wouldn't they? Days turned into weeks, and still Max sat on the porch, waiting. Neighbors began to approach him with food and water, and though Max would eat, he never strayed far from the porch. He seemed to be in a trance, eyes constantly darting to the street, searching for the familiar car that had taken his family away. It was as if he believed, with every fiber of his being, that they would come back for him. One cold, drizzly night, Mrs. Green, who lived across the street, decided she couldn't bear to watch any longer. She tried to coax Max into her home, offering him warm blankets and a place by the fire. But Max only looked at her with those deep, soulful eyes, as if he were apologizing, and turned back to the porch. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the kindness. He simply couldn't leave his post. It was as though some invisible tether bound him to that spot, a loyalty so fierce it seemed almost supernatural. As word spread about Max's vigil, Brindlewood became united in its concern. People brought him treats and blankets. Children would stop by after school to pet him, whispering words of encouragement. Someone even set up a makeshift shelter on the porch to shield him from the elements. Yet, no matter the generosity of the townspeople, Max's heart remained anchored to the hope that his family would return. Max's story began to travel beyond the town's borders. A passerby posted a picture of him online, and before anyone knew it, Max had become an internet sensation. The story of the loyal dog waiting for his family resonated with people everywhere. News crews showed up, asking questions and taking footage of the dog with the heart of gold. Reporters interviewed the townsfolk, who shared stories of Max's unwavering loyalty and kindness. The world was captivated, unable to comprehend such devotion. It was as if Max had become a symbol of a love so rare and pure that people from all walks of life found themselves drawn to him. The attention brought waves of visitors to Brindlewood, people wanting to see the loyal dog with their own eyes, to bear witness to his story. Some visitors wept as they watched Max, while others left small tokens of affection on the porch, flowers, letters, toys. Yet, for all the attention he received, Max remained focused, his gaze forever trained on the street, waiting for the family who had left him. The grocery store owner, who had always kept to himself, now greeted everyone with a warm smile as he offered Max's favorite treats on the house. Children who used to bicker over games found common ground in playing near Max, eager to share stories of the treats or toys they had brought him. Even the town council began discussing ways to honor Max's story, planning a small plaque for the porch to commemorate his loyalty. Despite all this kindness, Max's loyalty remained steadfastly focused on one goal. He was waiting for the day his family would return. The townsfolk understood this, and it was the unspoken reason they couldn't bring themselves to try and move him or force him to stay with one person permanently. In his heart, Max believed he was only temporary, a visitor in Brindlewood until his family returned. They could see it in his eyes, and so they did the only thing they could. They waited with him. But the seasons changed, and with them came new questions. What would happen to Max as he grew older? Could he continue to wait like this forever? Some in town began quietly discussing whether it might be kinder to help him move on, to let go of the hope that had kept him anchored to that porch. But those who had spent the most time with Max disagreed. They saw a strength in him that was unbreakable, a resolve that defied logic. And so, the debate continued, but nothing changed. Max stayed, and Brindlewood stayed with him. Every time someone considered taking him in, Max would resist. His loyalty was his strength, and it was also his prison. No one could bring themselves to break his spirit by forcing him to abandon his post. There was something sacred in his vigil, and the townsfolk respected it, even when it tugged at their own hearts to see him waiting day after day, his eyes scanning the road with a faith that never wavered. Then, on a misty morning in late autumn, a surprising visitor arrived, a woman, middle-aged and weary-looking, who introduced herself as Max's former neighbor from the Turners' old neighborhood before they'd moved to Brindlewood. She had heard about Max's story and decided to visit, compelled by curiosity and sorrow for the dog who had once been so close to her own family. As she stood on the porch, looking down at Max, a tear rolled down her cheek. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur, and whispered softly, "They would be so proud of you, Max." The woman stayed for a while, sitting with Max and sharing stories from the time before the Turners had moved to Brindlewood, stories that Max seemed to remember with each wag of his tail. She promised to return with photos and stories to keep him company, telling the townsfolk that while she couldn't take Max in, she would be there for him as much as she could. And so, as Max's vigil continued, Brindlewood found a renewed sense of purpose in caring for him. They knew that he would wait as long as it took, and they would wait with him. In a world that was constantly rushing, constantly changing, Max's steadfastness became a symbol of the kind of loyalty that was rare, a reminder of a love that held on, no matter the time, no matter the distance. The town had changed, connected by their collective hope and their shared sorrow, and in a way, Max had given Brindlewood something far more profound than just a story. He had reminded them all of what it meant to hold on to what mattered, even when the world seemed determined to move on. As Max's story continued to spread, it drew not only locals but also people from distant towns who had heard of the loyal dog of Brindlewood. The story resonated with everyone who had ever felt loss, loyalty, or the bittersweet pang of waiting. Visitors arrived daily, each person hoping to catch a glimpse of Max and perhaps draw some inspiration from his unwavering devotion. They would leave little offerings, flowers, notes, toys, and even donations to support his care. The porch of the old Victorian house transformed into a shrine of sorts, a place where people came to witness something rare and beautiful. The townsfolk, though initially surprised by the attention, eventually accepted it. After all, Max had become something of a legend, a symbol of unbreakable loyalty that people needed to see in a world that often felt too transient. One rainy afternoon, a man in a weathered trench coat arrived in town, his eyes dark with a heaviness that seemed to mirror the weight of Max's story. He approached the porch slowly, his movements hesitant, as if he were carrying a burden too great to bear. The townspeople watched curiously, their gazes following him as he knelt beside Max, his hands trembling as he reached out to stroke the dog's damp fur. Max, who typically only accepted affection from familiar faces, allowed the touch, turning his head slightly to look up at the man with an expression that seemed almost knowing. The stranger sat there for hours in silence, his hand never leaving Max's back, as if drawing strength from the dog's presence. When the man finally stood to leave, he turned to the small crowd that had gathered around the porch, and with a voice choked with emotion, introduced himself as Sam, Mr. Turner's younger brother. He explained that he hadn't known the full story of what happened with the Turners until recently. The family had left Brindlewood under the shadow of a personal tragedy, fleeing circumstances that had upended their lives and fractured their stability. They had tried to bring Max with them, he said, but in their chaos, they had ultimately left him behind, intending to return for him. Sam had only recently learned of Max's vigil and felt compelled to visit, to see for himself if the dog he'd once known was truly as loyal as the stories claimed. The townspeople, listening with bated breath, felt a mix of anger and understanding. They had made peace with Max's presence in Brindlewood. In their eyes, he was theirs now, an honorary member of the community. Yet they couldn't deny that Sam's story gave a new dimension to Max's loyalty. For Max had not been abandoned out of malice, but rather as a consequence of a family's painful struggle to survive and rebuild after loss. Sam spoke of his regret for not stepping in sooner, for not realizing that Max was here, waiting, while the Turners pieced together their shattered lives in another town. Sam stayed in Brindlewood for a week, visiting Max every day, getting to know the community that had taken the dog in as one of their own. Slowly, the town opened up to him, sharing stories of how Max had brought them together, how his presence had mended rifts and kindled friendships. Sam began to understand that Max had found something in Brindlewood that went beyond loyalty to the family that had raised him. He had found a new family, a family that cared for him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As the days went on, Sam found himself grappling with a decision. Part of him wanted to bring Max to the Turners, to reunite him with the family who had loved him first. But another part of him saw that Max had already found a place here, a place where he was not just waiting, but thriving in his own way. Every morning, he watched as Mrs. Green brought Max his breakfast, as Mr. Hall shared his stories, and as the children laughed and played around him, including Max in their lives, as if he had always been there. Sam felt torn, knowing that taking Max away would break not only Max's heart, but also the hearts of the townspeople who had grown to love him. On his final day in Brindlewood, Sam stood on the porch, looking out over the quiet town. He knelt down beside Max, running his fingers through his fur one last time. The townsfolk gathered around, sensing that a decision was about to be made, each one of them holding their breath, hoping that Sam would leave Max in their care. Finally, Sam cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he spoke. "I came here thinking I would bring Max back to my family," he began, his gaze fixed on the loyal dog sitting beside him. "But I can see now that he's already found his family here. And I think that's what he deserves, a place where he's loved, where he belongs. Thank you, all of you, for giving him that." A collective sigh of relief passed through the crowd, followed by smiles, tears, and whispers of gratitude. The people of Brindlewood knew what this decision meant, not just for Max, but for the entire community. Max had not only brought them together, but had given them a purpose, a reminder of the power of compassion and the strength of loyalty. And in choosing to leave Max with them, Sam had entrusted the town with a part of his family's heart. With Sam's departure, Brindlewood settled into a new rhythm, one that now included Max as an official member of the town. They organized a small ceremony in his honor, gathering around the Victorian house to unveil a plaque on the porch, engraved with the words, "In honor of Max, the loyal guardian of Brindlewood." The plaque served as a reminder of the love that had bound them all together, a tribute to the dog who had waited for years, showing everyone what it meant to truly believe in something worth holding on to. Over time, the porch became a cherished landmark. People came from miles away to see Max, to read his story on the plaque, and to leave their own notes of hope and encouragement. One day, as the leaves began to turn, Max's story took an unexpected turn. A man showed up, a distant relative of the Turners. He had come in hopes of bringing Max to the family, who, he explained, had been forced to leave Brindlewood due to unforeseen circumstances. He didn't elaborate, but his eyes carried a sorrow that seemed to hint at hardship. The neighbors looked on, torn between relief and sadness, as the man knelt beside Max and tried to lead him away. But Max, in his quiet, steadfast way, resisted, pulling back toward the house. It was clear to everyone that Max had made his choice. This was his home, his waiting place. The man, seeing Max's resolve, relented and left, promising to return another day. But deep down, everyone knew that Max had chosen to stay. He belonged to Brindlewood now, not just as a pet, but as a piece of its heart, a reminder of the strength of love and loyalty. The townspeople of Brindlewood had always prided themselves on looking out for one another, but Max's silent vigil brought out a side of the community that even they hadn't known existed. The sight of Max, alone on the porch day after day, had stirred something deep within them, a fierce desire to protect, comfort, and care for him in ways they never imagined they would for a dog who wasn't even theirs. And so a remarkable routine began to unfold. It started with Mrs. Green, who had been the first to reach out to Max in the days following the Turners' departure. She took it upon herself to bring him breakfast every morning. As dawn broke over Brindlewood, she would cross the street, rain or shine, with a bowl of warm food and fresh water. She would talk to him softly, telling him stories about her day and reminiscing about his time with the Turners. Max would listen, his head tilting ever so slightly as if he understood every word. Mrs. Green knew he could sense her care, and while he didn't abandon his post, he showed his gratitude by resting his head on her knee for a moment before turning back to his vigil. Soon, other neighbors followed her lead. Mr. Hall, the retired postman, began stopping by every afternoon, bringing treats he baked in his kitchen, the same kind he used to make for his own dog years ago. He'd sit on the porch steps, sharing stories from his days delivering mail, hoping to keep Max company. In the evenings, young Emma Dawkins would come by after finishing her homework, sitting by Max and petting him as she told him about her day at school. She was convinced that Max's family had simply lost their way and would eventually come back, and she would whisper words of encouragement to him, believing that her faith in his family's return would help him hold on. Max became more than a dog to these people. He was a part of their lives, a thread woven into their daily routines. They found solace in caring for him, in bringing him comfort, even though they knew he was waiting for something they could never provide. People started leaving small gifts by his shelter on the porch, a warm blanket, a soft toy, a handwritten note. It became something of a tradition in Brindlewood. Every time someone felt they needed a bit of good luck, they would bring a little offering to Max, like he was some guardian spirit watching over the town. One day, the local vet, Dr. Rayleigh, paid him a visit, concerned that Max's long vigil might be taking a toll on his health. Dr. Rayleigh tried to coax him into his truck, hoping to bring him in for a checkup. But Max wouldn't budge. His eyes were focused on the road, his body still, as if he couldn't bear to move a single inch from his spot. Dr. Rayleigh, though he had seen many loyal dogs in his years of practice, had never seen anything quite like Max's devotion. He decided to examine Max right there on the porch, making it part of his rounds to check on him every week. To everyone's relief, Max was in good health. He was thin, but strong, his eyes bright with a fierce determination that defied any worry of age or fatigue. Meanwhile, Max's story continued to spread. A local reporter, inspired by the townspeople's loyalty to him, wrote an article titled "Brindlewood's Loyal Guardian," detailing the extraordinary bond between the town and the dog who refused to leave his old home. The article was shared widely, and people from neighboring towns and even further afield came to see Max, to offer their own tokens of hope and to witness the miracle of his dedication. Visitors left with tears in their eyes, touched by the scene of this small-town dog holding on to hope with an intensity that seemed almost human. As the months passed, Brindlewood transformed in subtle ways, all due to Max's quiet influence. People who had once barely spoken began to connect through their shared compassion for him. As time went on, Max's presence in Brindlewood took on a life of its own, almost as if he were more than just a dog, but rather a symbol woven into the town's very fabric. Even after Sam's decision to leave Max in Brindlewood, the town rallied around him with renewed purpose. Everyone contributed in their own way. Mrs. Green, always the first to lend a hand, took it upon herself to organize a schedule so that Max was never without company or care. She crafted a calendar on her refrigerator, with names neatly filling each slot. Every day, a new face would come by the porch to spend time with Max, ensuring he had everything he needed, from food and warmth to the companionship he had come to rely on. As the years slipped by, Max's presence brought an unexpected gift to Brindlewood: a deeper, more lasting sense of unity. Neighbors who had barely exchanged more than polite greetings before were now working together, bound by their shared commitment to Max. They exchanged stories, laughed, shared meals, and helped each other with tasks. And, in a way, Max had rekindled the spirit of a tight-knit community that some had thought was lost in the modern age. The townspeople began to see each other differently, realizing that their individual lives were like threads woven into the same tapestry, all connected through their care for this loyal dog who had chosen to stay. With each season, Max became a beloved fixture in Brindlewood's traditions. In the spring, children would decorate the porch with fresh flowers, each one carefully chosen and laid out in small bouquets around Max's favorite resting spot. They even painted small stones with vibrant colors, marking the borders of the flower beds as a way of welcoming in the warmer days. During the summer, families would gather by the porch for evening picnics, sharing stories under the setting sun, with Max lounging comfortably among them, a gentle observer to the laughter and warmth that filled the air. In autumn, a local artist painted a mural on the side of the old Victorian house, a sweeping tribute that featured Max among the turning leaves, watching over Brindlewood with an expression of calm and love. But winter was perhaps the most touching season of all. As the first snow blanketed the town, the children would hang small ornaments on a tree by Max's porch, each one representing a hope, a wish, or a message to the loyal dog who had become a fixture in their lives. They called it the Tree of Faith, a tradition they created to honor Max's patience and dedication. The adults, touched by the children's thoughtfulness, contributed too, hanging small wooden hearts and stars, each inscribed with a wish or a promise, as if hoping to give back some of the hope that Max had shown them. One particularly harsh winter brought a fierce snowstorm that blanketed Brindlewood in thick layers of snow. Roads were closed, and the biting wind kept most people indoors, huddled by their fires. But even in the storm's fury, Max remained on the porch, a silhouette against the white, steadfast in his vigil. Mrs. Green, who lived across the street, couldn't bear the sight of Max out there in the cold. She bundled herself up, braving the wind and snow, determined to bring Max inside. But as she approached, Max looked at her with a calm determination that stopped her in her tracks. It was as if he were saying, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Reluctantly, with a heart heavy with respect and sorrow, Mrs. Green brought him extra blankets, tucking them around him carefully before retreating, hoping that the layers of warmth would keep him safe. That stormy winter evening became one of those nights that people in Brindlewood would remember for years to come. A few neighbors gathered by their windows, watching the silent vigil unfold. They shared quiet glances with each other, a collective understanding passing between them. That night, Brindlewood felt like one giant family, bound by their love for Max and the unspoken promise that, no matter what, they would always watch over him. When the storm finally passed, Brindlewood woke to a world of soft, untouched snow, and there on the porch was Max, still sitting proudly, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. It was a sight that stirred something deep within the townsfolk, a reminder of resilience, of waiting, of loyalty, even when faced with the harshest conditions. Max had become more than a symbol. He was a living testament to the strength it took to stay true, even when the world around you grew cold and uncertain. As Max aged, the townsfolk began to notice the signs of time wearing on him. His gait slowed, his golden fur speckled with more gray, and he spent longer hours resting, his vigilant eyes still occasionally searching the road, but with a softness that seemed to say he had found peace with his choice to stay. The children who had once played around him had grown older too, but they still came to visit, their teenage laughter a comforting echo of the innocent games they used to play beside him. One quiet afternoon, a local woman named Laura, who had recently moved back to Brindlewood after years away, approached the porch with a book in hand. She had heard about Max's story from her old friends and felt an undeniable pull to visit him, to be part of this town tradition that had united the community so profoundly. She sat beside him, her voice soft as she read aloud. She chose stories of loyalty, friendship, and love, tales that mirrored the very essence of Max's vigil. Max rested his head on her knee, listening to her voice, his eyes closing as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. And thus began another tradition. Laura became a regular visitor, reading to Max from her collection of books, each story a tribute to the values he represented. Max's story, in time, reached far beyond Brindlewood. People from all over began to visit the town to meet the dog who had captured hearts with his patience and love. Some visitors came seeking comfort, others looking for inspiration, but all left with a sense of peace, as if Max's quiet presence had granted them a gift of understanding and healing. The town set up a small visitor's book by the porch, allowing people to write their reflections, messages of gratitude, and memories of their visit with Max. The book filled with pages upon pages of heartfelt words, stories from people who had traveled far and wide just to sit by his side. One evening, as the sun set over Brindlewood, casting a warm golden light across the town, the townsfolk gathered around the old Victorian house for a special ceremony. They had decided to officially make Max an honorary citizen of Brindlewood, bestowing upon him the title, the Heart of Brindlewood. The mayor, a gentleman with a deep love for his town, gave a heartfelt speech, thanking Max for his unwavering loyalty and acknowledging the impact he had made on the lives of everyone in Brindlewood. The ceremony ended with each townsfolk placing a hand on Max, a moment of silent reverence and gratitude for the dog who had, in his quiet way, transformed their town forever. It was in this moment that they realized Max had not simply been waiting. He had been teaching them, reminding them of the importance of love, resilience, and the strength it took to stand by those we care for, even when the world offered no guarantees. That night, as the stars dotted the sky and a gentle breeze whispered through the town, Max lay down on the porch, his gaze toward the road one last time before he closed his eyes, his breathing soft and peaceful. The townsfolk knew, as they washed over him, that Max had found his place, that he had fulfilled his purpose. Brindlewood would carry his legacy forward, forever changed by the quiet, loyal guardian who had given them a piece of his heart. The morning after the ceremony, Brindlewood awoke to a somber silence. Max had peacefully passed away on the porch he'd guarded so loyally for years, his watch over the town finally complete. Mrs. Green was the first to find him, her heart both heavy and full as she knelt beside him, rushing her fingers gently over his fur. It was as if a quietness had settled over the town, a reverent hush that spread from house to house as the news traveled. People moved slowly, speaking in soft tones, each one grappling with the loss of a figure who had been so much more than a dog. Max had been a friend, a symbol, and a silent anchor to each of them. That day, the townspeople gathered around the old Victorian house, hearts weighed down with grief, but also a deep sense of gratitude. The children were the first to arrive, their eyes wet with tears as they gently placed flowers, drawings, and notes beside Max's resting place on the porch. Some brought small toys they had once shared with him, while others left handwritten letters, words they could never say but felt he somehow knew. Soon, the adults began to gather too, standing in silence, each of them touched by a bittersweet mixture of sadness and love. They held hands, supporting one another, as if sharing the burden of saying goodbye. The town decided to give Max the kind of farewell he deserved, a tribute to his legacy, a ceremony that would honor the life he dedicated to them. Over the next few days, Brindlewood transformed as everyone pitched in to prepare. Mrs. Green organized a group to build a small stone monument on the edge of the Victorian house's porch, a lasting marker that would commemorate Max's loyalty. Others came together to prepare food, music, and stories, wanting to celebrate not only Max's life, but also the way he had brought them all closer. The townspeople planned every detail with care, each of them eager to contribute something to honor the dog who had given so much to their lives. When the day of the ceremony arrived, the entire town gathered in front of the Victorian house, dressed in their finest clothes as a show of respect. Even people from neighboring towns who had heard of Max's story joined the gathering, wanting to pay their respects. The crowd was large, yet the atmosphere remained quiet and reverent, filled with a shared sense of awe and gratitude. A path of flowers led up to the porch, where Max had spent his days, now adorned with garlands and candles that flickered gently in the breeze. The ceremony began with Mr. Hall, the retired postman, stepping forward to share a few words. His voice trembled as he recounted his memories of Max, of the countless afternoons he'd spent sitting with him on the porch, sharing stories and treats. "Max taught us something that words can't express," he said, his eyes glistening. "He reminded us that loyalty, love, and kindness don't require anything in return. He showed us that sometimes the simplest acts hold the greatest power." Following Mr. Hall, Mrs. Green spoke, her voice thick with emotion, as she described how Max had been her friend during lonely nights, a steady presence that had given her comfort when she needed it most. She shared stories of bringing him breakfast each morning, of how he would rest his head on her knee as if to say thank you. Her words resonated with the crowd, capturing the depth of the bond she and so many others had formed with Max. One by one, other townsfolk came forward, sharing their own stories of Max. Parents spoke of the joy he had brought to their children, of how he had taught them kindness and empathy. Teenagers, who had once been children playing around Max's porch, shared memories of growing up with him as a constant presence. Even visitors from neighboring towns, who had come to see Max's vigil and had left touched by his story, shared how meeting him had inspired them in unexpected ways. As each person spoke, the air filled with a sense of collective memory, a mosaic of moments that painted a picture of a life lived with quiet dignity and unwavering love. Max's impact became evident in the words of each speaker, a reminder of how deeply he had touched every soul in Brindlewood and beyond. The final tribute was perhaps the most touching. The children of Brindlewood had prepared a song for Max, a simple melody with lyrics they had written themselves. Their voices rose softly in the evening air, each note carrying a sense of innocence and purity that mirrored Max's gentle spirit. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as the children sang, their voices weaving together in a harmony that seemed to touch the heavens. Max had been their friend, their protector, and in their song, they offered him their final goodbye, a farewell filled with love and gratitude. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the townsfolk held a candlelight vigil, encircling the porch in a ring of warm light. They stayed there long into the night, sharing stories and memories, united in a grief that felt almost sacred. Though their hearts ached with the loss, they found comfort in each other, drawing strength from the community that Max had brought together. It was as if Max's spirit lingered among them, a silent guardian who would forever watch over Brindlewood. In the days that followed, life in Brindlewood slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the town was forever changed. Max's presence lingered in small ways, a familiar warmth in the air, a gentle reminder in the faces of the townsfolk as they passed one another on the street. They would often pause by the stone monument, now adorned with flowers and trinkets, taking a moment to remember the loyal dog who had given them so much. Children would tell newcomers about Max, sharing his story with pride, ensuring that his legacy would live on in every generation. Brindlewood's sense of community, its bonds of love and compassion, continued to flourish long after Max's passing. The traditions he had inspired, the seasonal gatherings, the tree of faith, the acts of kindness toward one another, became permanent parts of the town's identity. People found themselves more inclined to reach out, to lend a hand, to be there for each other in ways they hadn't before. Max's story, etched into the town's memory, served as a reminder that true loyalty and love could endure any hardship, bridging gaps and healing wounds that might otherwise go unnoticed. Max's tale even inspired a new annual event called Max's Day of Loyalty, held on the anniversary of his passing. The entire town would gather by his monument, sharing stories of loved ones, reflecting on the power of loyalty and kindness, and committing themselves anew to the values Max had embodied. It was a day of joy, love, and remembrance, a day when Brindlewood celebrated not just Max's life, but also the lives of everyone who had ever loved and waited, hoped and held on. People from all over continued to visit Brindlewood, drawn by the story of Max, the loyal guardian. They came to see the monument, to read the visitor's book filled with memories and reflections, to walk the paths Max had trod, and to feel the presence of a dog whose loyalty had touched hearts across the world. Some would come to leave a note or a small offering, others to simply sit by the monument in quiet contemplation, finding solace in the story of a dog who had waited so long and loved so deeply. Years passed, and Brindlewood changed as towns do, with new faces and new stories. But Max's legacy endured. His monument remained a cherished landmark, and his story a part of Brindlewood's soul, retold by each new generation. He had been a simple dog with an extraordinary heart, a loyal guardian who had brought a town together and shown them the power of love and patience. Brindlewood would forever carry Max's spirit, and the town was grateful, knowing that they had been touched by a presence as loyal and pure as Max's, a love that would never fade. As the years rolled on, Brindlewood remained a place transformed by the legacy of Max, the loyal dog who had taught them more about love, patience, and resilience than anyone could have imagined. His story became something of a legend, passed down from one generation to the next, each telling infused with reverence and wonder. Children who hadn't even been born during Max's life grew up hearing about him, his image etched into their minds by tales from parents, teachers, and friends. It was as if Max had become part of Brindlewood's folklore, his presence lingering in the spirit of the town. The monument by the old Victorian house stood tall, a constant reminder of his loyalty and love. It became a tradition for each child in Brindlewood to leave a small token at the monument on their birthdays, a flower, a drawing, or a simple stone painted with their name. Parents explained that this act was a way to connect with Max, to show gratitude for the love he had spread throughout the town. Over time, the base of the monument became a kaleidoscope of colors and memories, a beautiful mosaic created by countless children who felt a connection to a dog they'd never met, but who had somehow shaped their lives. One summer, a teacher named Mrs. Caldwell, who had recently moved to Brindlewood, was inspired by Max's story to include him in her curriculum. She encouraged her students to write essays about what loyalty and kindness meant to them, using Max's story as their starting point. The responses were heartfelt and thoughtful, with children writing about their friends, their family, and even about Max himself. It became clear to Mrs. Caldwell that Max's story resonated deeply with the children, shaping their understanding of empathy, loyalty, and the importance of standing by those they cared for. The essays were displayed in the school's main hall, where visitors and students alike could read the touching words of the children, their innocence and understanding shining through in each piece. Max's legacy continued to ripple outward, even beyond Brindlewood's borders. Artists, writers, and musicians who heard of Max's story found themselves inspired to create in his honor. A poet from a neighboring town composed a collection of poems dedicated to Max, capturing the spirit of his unwavering loyalty in verses that spoke of love, hope, and the strength to hold on even in the face of uncertainty. An artist painted a mural of Max, depicting him watching over Brindlewood with a serene gaze, a gentle reminder of the peace he had brought to the town. The mural became a popular landmark, drawing visitors who would stand in quiet reflection, contemplating the profound impact one loyal dog had on so many lives. As the years continued to pass, Brindlewood found itself evolving, with new businesses opening, families moving in, and fresh stories unfolding. Yet through all the changes, Max remained a central figure, his spirit preserved in the traditions and values he had inspired. Brindlewood's annual Max's Day of Loyalty grew into a much-anticipated event, attracting not only locals but also people from neighboring towns and even farther afield. Each year, on this special day, the town would gather by the monument, sharing stories of loyalty and love, reading passages from the visitor's book, and reflecting on the lessons Max had taught them. One particular Max's Day of Loyalty, decades after Max's passing, saw an unprecedented turnout. People from all over came to Brindlewood, many of them strangers who had read about Max's story in books, articles, and online. The crowd was so large that it spilled into the nearby streets, and townspeople opened their homes and businesses to welcome the influx of visitors. A local filmmaker, who had been deeply touched by Max's story as a child, returned to capture the day on film, interviewing townsfolk, visitors, and children to preserve the memory of Max's legacy for future generations. Among the visitors that year was a young woman named Emily, who had traveled from a distant city after learning of Max's story online. She had recently gone through a difficult time in her life, feeling lost and unsure of her future. The story of Max had touched her deeply, offering her a sense of peace and hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. Standing before the monument, Emily closed her eyes, feeling the gentle presence of Max's spirit around her. She placed a single white rose at the base of the monument, her heart filled with gratitude for the dog who, without ever meeting her, had given her the strength to believe in loyalty, love, and resilience once again. Later that evening, the townspeople gathered for a candlelight vigil, holding their candles high as they recited words of gratitude for Max. Parents held their children close, friends embraced, and strangers shared quiet conversations. In that moment, Brindlewood felt like a single, beating heart, each person connected by the invisible thread of love and loyalty that Max had left behind. It was a powerful scene, one that etched itself into the memory of everyone present. When the vigil ended, the town council announced a new initiative inspired by Max's legacy, a community fund that would support families and individuals in need, a fund that would help those facing hardship or loss. Just as Max had helped Brindlewood to remember the importance of kindness and loyalty. Named Max's Hope Fund, the initiative was welcomed with resounding support, with donations pouring in from townspeople and visitors alike. It was a way for Brindlewood to carry Max's spirit forward, to ensure that his memory would continue to inspire acts of love and compassion for generations to come. Years continued to pass, and Max's story remained as vibrant as ever, woven into the daily lives of Brindlewood's residents. His story became a source of pride, an example that parents used to teach their children about love and resilience. Max's name was spoken with reverence, and his legacy was alive in the hearts of everyone who called Brindlewood home. His monument stood as a silent guardian over the town, a testament to a life lived with pure, unwavering loyalty. Brindlewood's story, the story of a town united by one loyal dog, spread far and wide, inspiring other communities to adopt similar values of compassion and unity. Towns across the region began holding their own days of loyalty, celebrating stories of love, kindness, and resilience, all inspired by the memory of Max. His story became a beacon, reminding people everywhere that one heart, one act of love, could change an entire world. In the end, Brindlewood knew that Max had never truly left them. His spirit was alive in every act of kindness, in every embrace, in every moment of patience and love. Max had given them a gift that would last forever, a reminder that loyalty was not just a word but a way of life, a choice to hold on, to care, to love, even when it was difficult, even when it was painful, even when there was no guarantee of return. As the town looked toward the future, they knew that Max's story would continue to be told, that his legacy would live on in the hearts of every child born in Brindlewood, every visitor who came to see his monument, every person who found inspiration in the tale of the loyal dog who had taught a town to love. In this way, Max became not just a memory, but a part of the very soul of Brindlewood, a quiet guardian whose love would never fade. And as long as there was Brindlewood, there would always be Max, watching over them, forever loyal. Harris, clearly frustrated, clenched his jaw and glared at Alexis one last time before finally backing off, muttering something unintelligible as he turned away. Officer Grant, who had maintained a passive role throughout, seemed relieved to step back as well, as though he'd been hoping for an excuse to end the encounter. Without another word, the two officers retreated to their car, the tension dissipating as they drove away, leaving Alexis standing there, stunned but victorious. The crowd began to disperse, but the memory of the encounter lingered in the air. Alexis stood there, shaken but empowered, realizing that she had won a silent battle against an unjust authority. She could feel the adrenaline still rushing through her veins, but beneath it was a growing sense of pride. She hadn't just stood up for herself. She'd stood up for her as Alexis drove away from the scene, her hands still trembling on the steering wheel. Her mind raced with everything that had just happened. She replayed the events in her head, the sneer in Officer Harris's voice, the way he'd spoken down to her, the veiled threat in his tone. Her heart was still pounding, but alongside the residual fear, a new feeling had started to take root: resolve. She realized that this wasn't something she could simply move past or forget. The incident had shown her a dark side of her town she had only heard whispers about. She had always considered herself lucky to live in a community that felt safe and familiar, but now she was questioning how much of that safety was a facade, a privilege she'd taken for granted until today. That evening, as she sat down at her kitchen table, she debated her next move. Part of her just wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to a single bad experience and try to move on. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away, and she knew in her heart that if she didn't speak up, she'd be letting down not only herself, but also those in her community who didn't have the strength or platform to fight back. She picked up her phone and opened the recording she'd started during the encounter, listening to Harris's cold, calculated words echoing through her kitchen. Hearing his voice again ignited her anger, but it also fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system that allowed people like him to get away with treating others as less than human. The following morning, Alexis contacted a local civil rights organization, explaining what had happened and asking for guidance. The representative on the other end of the line listened intently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When she finished recounting the events, the representative, a woman named Maria, responded with a tone of understanding that made Alexis feel seen and validated. "I want you to know that you're not alone in this, Alexis," Maria said firmly. "What you experienced is, unfortunately, not uncommon. We've had several similar reports about Officer Harris. If you're willing, we can file a formal complaint and take this to the next level. But this process won't be easy. It may involve public hearings, media attention, and scrutiny from both supporters and critics." Alexis took a deep breath, knowing the gravity of what she was about to commit to. She didn't take the decision lightly. As much as the thought of public exposure made her uneasy, she couldn't shake the image of Harris's smug face, his silent assertion that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. She agreed to move forward, and with Maria's guidance, they began drafting a formal complaint. They detailed every aspect of the encounter, attaching the audio recording and witness statements from some of the onlookers who had stepped forward to support her. The days that followed were tense. Word of the complaint spread quickly through town, and soon local news outlets caught wind of the story. Alexis's phone began to ring incessantly, reporters wanting to hear her side, community members reaching out to express both support and criticism. Some of her neighbors warned her that this fight would only bring trouble, that she should have kept her head down and let it pass. But for every person who tried to dissuade her, there were 3 others who called her brave, who thanked her for standing up to the injustice they had also experienced in silence.